This Trek mountain bike was described as barely used by the previous owner, so I wanted to see if I could sell it on for a profit as part of my challenge to flip my way from £100 to an e-bike that I plan to give away to my dad at the end of this series. The challenge cash pot is currently sitting at £613, so follow along to this episode where we'll find out if this bike gives us a perfect profit or is actually a hidden headache. Right, so I've just bought this Trek Marlin 5 off Facebook Marketplace for £120. The seller originally wanted £200 for this bike, but the listing was really poor. There was only one photo, it's really blurry, didn't really show the bike in any great detail. And then the description was literally just a cut and paste from Trek's website. I don't think it was even related to this particular bike. So lo and behold, the bike had been sat on Facebook Marketplace for a number of weeks with no interest. They then reduced the bike to £150, which I still thought was quite expensive based on what I could see in the photo. So I was trying to negotiate with the seller to make the price a little bit more reasonable, but they were adamant that the bike was in fantastic condition, it was perfect, and it had barely been used. However, as we've found throughout this series, it's very rarely the case when someone says something's perfect or it's in great condition that in reality it actually is. And unfortunately, this bike is no different, as we'll see in a minute when we do our condition report. I don't think it comes from a place of malice or a place of dishonesty. I think that people generally look at a bike like this and they go, it looks all right, you know, it's a Trek, it should sell well. They've only used it a few times, and so they assume that it's in a great condition, when the reality is quite different. Without further ado, let's have a look at the condition of this bike, and then we can move on to hopefully improving it throughout the video and then selling it at the end for maybe a little bit of profit. Okay, so the Trek Marlin 5, it's a 2016 model, so almost a decade old now, and unfortunately that shows in the spec when you compare it to the more modern Trek 5s that they're putting out today. It is a 29er, however, but as we'll see in a minute, it's quite a heavily XC spec 29er. The first thing that I noticed was with the drivetrain. So it's a 3x7 drivetrain. Again, that is pretty outdated, but I could just tell, I didn't even need to take the chain measurement tool. I could already tell that this is a really worn out chain. We're definitely gonna have to replace this. We'll also replace the cassette as well, because I think this is probably worn out enough that it's worth replacing this. Generally speaking though, everything is quite dirty, quite mucked up. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but it definitely needs a good clean up with all the jockey wheels. And as you can see, like in there, it always gets dirty down there because people struggle to get in there and clean it. This has got mechanical disc brakes. As you can see with this one, what the hell's happened here? The cable isn't inserted into the brake lever properly, so I'm surprised that this even works at all. It's a little bit difficult to see the brake pads on this model, so they might be worn out and need replacement, but I'll have to look at that when I actually take the wheels off. Front wheels running pretty smoothly. It's just a little bit out of true, so it just needs a bit of a tune up there. There's no play or wobble in the wheel bearings, which is nice. Same with the rear wheel. It's not running funny. No play or wobble, so that's good. There doesn't feel like there's any play coming out of the bottom bracket, and certainly no weird creaks or clicking when I'm backpedaling it. However, with these sort of things, you've kind of got to get outside and actually ride them to be able to tell if they're creaking or wearing out. There's no play at all in the headset bearings. However, if I just take a finger and place it on the end of the handlebars and then I move the headset, I can just feel there's a little bit of resistance. It feels a little bit rough. So that might just be me being picky, but I'm going to drop these out and we'll have a look at the bearings. It might just be a case of cleaning them up and then re-greasing them or replacing the actual bearings themselves. These SR Suntour forks are in the kind of generic condition that I always find them in. It's certainly not the worst that we've had in. A few little rust spots that need cleaning off on the stanchions. The little dust seals on this fork are definitely getting worn out, but as I seem to always find on these bikes, they're just so difficult to get a hold of. They're only 75mm travel as well, so as I said, this is certainly a 2016 XC focused bike. It's almost branching into sort of modern day hybrid era with these fairly skinny 29er tyres, but the good thing is they've both got plenty of tread left on. I always try and look for bikes that have got decent tyres when I'm flipping bikes, because in the past it seemed like such a waste of money replacing tyres. People don't generally tend to value it so much on second-hand bikes. Unfortunately, I didn't really notice it when I went round to have a look at the bike, but it's also got a broken shift lever. It's meant to look like this, but unfortunately, that has obviously snapped off. They didn't mention that in the listing. Overall, this bike is all right, really. It's not too bad. It's certainly not the worst that we've had in the series so far. But my point is that I wouldn't say this bike is hardly being used. Anyway, at least it doesn't need too many things doing to it. I think there might be a little bit of profit left in this bike at the end of it. But now let's get it outside, give it a good wash, and then we can start disassembling and changing the bits that need to be changed. Okay, so the bike is looking a lot better after that very quick wash outside. Just allows me to get in there now, start disassembling the bike without getting too messy. So I'm just going to very quickly disassemble this drivetrain now. I can then give it a really good clean up before installing new parts like the new chain, new cassette, that sort of thing. Get this old worn chain out of there. This is really old. This derailleur is going to be much easier to clean up when it's off the bike, so I'm just going to very quickly remove it. Goodness me, this is on here really tight. Gosh, who installed that so tight? That's ridiculous. Probably with no anti-seize either. Yeah, luckily it's not damaged any of the threads, but that was quite lucky we didn't strip that. That wasn't so tight. Some people are asking where I got this crank puller tool from. Like many of my tools, they're from a very basic and cheap bike toolkit. To be fair though, they're still going strong many years later. I'm using gunk degreaser here to loosen up that old grime that's stuck to the jockey wheels and chain rings. It's good stuff, but it still needs quite a lot of agitation to get the grime unstuck, so I'm definitely looking forward to the day that I can afford an ultrasonic cleaner. The grime on these jockey wheels was incredibly hard and compact, very difficult to get off, so I actually had to chisel it off with a screwdriver, which is quite a messy job, as you can see here. It's probably a good idea to clean up these derailleur hanger threads before applying some assembly compound and getting it installed back on there, this time with a much more reasonable torque applied to the bolt. While the chain rings are off, it's a good time to give this whole area a good cleanup, as it's not the easiest place to get to normally. I'm using anti-seize compound on these square tapers in this episode. I know there does seem to be quite a lot of debate about whether you should use this or use grease, but I found that both work well on my own personal bikes to stop the cranks getting seized onto the square taper. Now moving on, we'll get this old cassette off the hub. To be fair, looks like there's a very good amount of grease in there, which probably explains why the wheel bearings feel so good on this bike. Very likely that that has been looked after properly. Like before, I'll give this a bit of a clean up, get all those years of grit and grime off the mating surfaces before putting the new cassette on. Again, just a little bit of anti-seize compound on here. And it's 40 Newton meters on this. I think one last. There we go. This was a little bit dry. Just before I hook all this back up, I noticed that this length of cable here, it's fine, but there was just a small amount of grittiness. I don't know if a little bit of mud or something's got in, but I'm just going to jet it out here. The cable itself looks really clean, so I don't think that needs to be replaced. Again, it's a very small thing. I'm just going to get a tiny little bit of light oil, and I'll run this along the cable and then put it all back. Yeah, that feels much better. I think that should be okay now. Brand new chain. I know some people just like to copy the length of the old chain, but that sometimes makes me a little bit nervous in case that was wrong. There are many great tutorials online about how to size a bike chain. In the end, this one did actually match the number of links that was on the previous chain. And just get that factory grease off with the GT85. This shift lever is broken, so I'm going to have a go at seeing if I can repair it. I'm going to start by mixing up this 2-part epoxy putty, and I'll use that to form a bit of a thumb shifter type of shape on what's left of the previous lever, giving me a base to build on top of. While I'm waiting for the epoxy to dry, I've made a little model in CAD of a cover that can go over that epoxy, and then I've 3D printed it in this flexible TPU filament, which should give it a little bit of compliance and therefore make it a bit comfier to use on the thumb. I've designed the cover so that it's got a small channel that runs in that rim around the cover, and that way you can put a zip tie through it, and then when it's pulled tight it just secures it over the dried epoxy and hopefully keeps it in place. While this has seemingly worked quite well, it's a lot more comfy than the thing that was there before, I'm not going to be using this on a bike that I'm going to be selling. It just doesn't seem right at all, does it? I managed to find a cheap replacement shifter that I'm going to put on instead for this bike, but I'll keep this unit because there is a bike that I've got that needs a new shifter and brake lever, so I'll be using it on that, but that's only for my own personal use. I probably wouldn't recommend selling a bike with this on. Got this brand new unit here, which comes with a shift cable already, which is quite nice. Now we can move on to checking that stiff headset. That one wasn't even tight. Oh, but that is. Okay, so this bottom one is quite nice and clean. Ooh, a lot of water. Yeah, that's not great. Before putting all this back together, I'm just going to remove all the rust from the fork and the steerer tube using this tin foil and WD-40, which as you can see works quite nicely. Just a bit of solvent on a rag helps to get rid of the old grease from the headset, then to be followed up with some new bearing grease using my trusty grease gun, which is still working really nicely. I think in the end this headset was just tightened up a little bit too much, making it feel quite rough. Hopefully with lots of fresh grease and then tightening it up properly should make it feel a lot smoother and last longer as well. This bike had already got some anti-seize on the seat post, it's just it had gone a bit old and manky, so I've scraped that off and we'll replace that with some fresh anti-seize. But it's really nice to see a bike actually come with it, probably from the factory or probably some decent bike shop. Put it on there when this bike's gone in for a service, but either way, really like to see it. Makes life a lot easier. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm setting the bike up is to make it in kind of the sportiest configuration that I can make it. Try and get that as level as I can. And that goes for the stem as well. The reason I've inverted the stem is to make the bike look as sporty as possible. Now this bike came with a really matching bottle cage. However, I am going to take it off because I prefer to sell bikes without the accessories. When I come to buff up the bike as well, it will also be a lot easier to do without this bottle cage in the way, but I'll keep that to one side. And then just a little bit of grease in there. And then the last stage will be to move on to polishing the bike up and making it look really nice for the listing. There's a wasp in there. Punishment if you miss your shift. And with that, let's take a look at the before and after. Okay, well that's pretty much everything on the bike. I would say that this flip is probably one of the better ones that I've done this series, in that it didn't really need that much doing to it in the end. Just a few new drivetrain components, new shift lever, then just a general going over of the bike, making sure the headset was re-greased and tightened correctly, and then just adjusting the cables and making sure the brakes are all running nice and smooth. Now I did take this bike out on a test ride on my normal test loop, and I found that I had to just adjust the front brake a little bit. That is the thing with these mechanical disc brakes, you do have to play with them a little bit to get them to bite correctly, but the rest of the bike was performing really, really well. The only problem was the weather conditions in the UK have been really terrible recently, so the bike and me both got incredibly muddy and dirty, which is a real shame because I've gone to all that effort of cleaning the bike up. That said, I am really glad that I applied that polish to the frame, because it meant that as soon as I got home, just literally hosed the bike down, and because of the coating that's on the bike now, all it needed was just a quick wash and a rinse and then a going over with a rag, and it was back to looking in that really nice clean condition. I think I've spoke about the benefits in previous episodes about applying a frame protectant spray or polish, and you can see in the clips that working away and how it's a lot easier to wash your bike when you've got something like that applied. Then listed the bike for sale. Again, unfortunately, because the weather in the UK is so dire, I've had this bike listed for a week and nobody has bought it yet. I have had 2 people come to view the bike. The one person came and I don't think they'd really checked out the sizing properly because it was just way too big for them, and they were kind of wondering if I could cut the seat post down for them, which of course I'm not going to do unless they buy the bike. The other person was just a complete time waster, a bit of a tyre kicker if you will. They came and they were pointing out little scratches on the frame, which I had noted in the listing anyway, and then they came in with a ridiculously lowball offer, 50% of the asking price. And so at that point I thought there's no point even trying to negotiate with someone like that, and I literally just rode off. You do generally have to price bikes quite competitively this time of year in order to get a sale, and I think I have done that, but yeah, there has been quite a lot of time wasters unfortunately on this bike. That said, there is one more person who's shown interest with the bike, and I'm hopefully meeting up with them in about an hour's time. Fingers crossed for a good sale, and I'll catch up with you in the next section of the video to run through if the bike has sold, and if so, if any profit has been made. Okay, so the bike has sold eventually. It did take quite a while this time, but before I go through what it sold for, I'm just going to talk about what we spent on the bike. In previous episodes, I've used a lot of aftermarket components because, quite frankly, in most cases, it has made sense to use aftermarket components given the price that a lot of the bikes were at. However, with this bike, because it's a name brand, I thought I'm also going to stick to name brand components as well. They are generally quite a lot more expensive, but I was able to get some good deals in this case. So genuine KMC chain was only £7.48. The cassette was a genuine Shimano one. Again, that was £11.95. So not too expensive really, only a couple of quid more than the aftermarket part. So I think worthwhile on this bike. With that broken gear shifter, I was thinking to myself, oh, it's going to be like 20 quid. It's going to be not economically viable to replace something like that. And that's why I had to go at trying to fix it with the epoxy putty. But after I'd finished that, let's face it, it was a bodge job, wasn't it? After I finished it, I looked back and I thought, I might be happy with that on my own personal bike, but you can't sell a bike with that on. It doesn't look right. And also, to be fair, it's probably a liability concern as well. And then when I had a look at the cost of how much they are to replace, I thought, well, I'm just definitely going to replace it then. It's only £7.99. I think that's really good considering it comes with the brake lever and the gear shifters as well. So I was quite happy with that. So that means that in total then, we spent £147.42 on the bike. Now, I do have to mention this every episode because otherwise I get loads of comments about it. I'm not going to include in my operating expenses like fuel, solvents, water, that sort of thing. What I'll do at the end of the series, I'll add all that up and have a look at a more accurate representation of the actual take-home profit made from this series. Okay, so I decided to list the bike for £230, which I think is probably more reasonable this time of year. I think in the summer I would probably go for maybe the 250, 270 mark for this bike. We aim to land around the 250. So yeah, reduced it a little bit for just to account for the time of year. And I did receive quite a number of offers, and I'll put those on the screen now. As you can see, quite a lot lower than the asking price, and I've received quite a lot of serious offers around the 200 mark. I was thinking that's probably where the value of this bike lies. Anyway, I received an offer the other day for £210, and so I ended up taking that offer. That gives us a profit of £62.58. Now, I know some people might scoff their nose at that and go, well, you know, 60 quid, is it worth it for all that hassle and effort? To be fair though, it was only about 2.5 hours of actual labour on the bike, so I really don't think that was too bad. Interestingly enough, I think had the previous owner of the bike maybe done a bit of a better description and took some better photos of the bike, cleaned it up, they probably would have got that 150 quid that they had reduced the bike for. But it just really goes to show that if you don't put enough effort into the listing, you are in very real terms losing money and throwing money away. Okay, so accounting for that new profit, that means that our challenge cash pot is now up to £675.64, which I think is really good. Now, in the last episode, I ended up donating the bikes, and then I asked you, the commenters, to tell me what you thought the bikes would be worth had I have sold them. And it was really interesting seeing the range of opinions, and thanks to everyone that did comment on that video. But I think the consensus landed around £40 for the Rally and then £80 for the Apollo folding bike. That means that we're going to add £120 to that separate bonus cash pot that I'm going to have alongside the main series cash pot. Now, I'm not too sure what I'm going to do with the bonus cash pot yet, so I suppose we'll have to wait and see when we get later on in the series. Anyway, talking about the future, I've just bought the next bike for episode 12, and I have to say, out of all the bikes I've bought so far, this is the one that I'm most excited about. So definitely stay tuned for the next episode. And if you are wanting to watch the next episode, make sure to click the series playlist here. And if you're all caught up but you want to be notified when the next episode comes out, make sure to click the subscribe button here. Thank you very much.